Darth Maul was a Dathomirian adult male born on Iridonia 54 years before the Battle of Yavin. As an infant, Maul was taken from Mother Talzin by Darth Sidious, who would eventually train him in the dark side of the Force. However, Maul would not get a full Sith training and instead was trained more as an assassin for Darth Sidious and Darth Plagueis. As an adult, Maul would become an accomplished duelist in lightsaber combat and hand-to-hand combat, but again, he never exhibited any high-level Sith abilities such as Force Lightning. Yet Maul was deemed a Sith Lord even in spite of there being 2 Dark Lords already. Eventually, Maul would be the first Sith to expose himself after a millennia, fighting against Obi-Wan Kenobi and Qui-Gon Jinn, though he would be mortally wounded by the former. He would return again during the Clone Wars, participating in several skirmishes on the Outer Rim with his brother Savage Opress. However, his reign would be short-lived as his former master Darth Sidious would make short work of his brother and defeat him as well. Maul would attempt to thwart Sidious once more with the aid of Mother Talzin, but she and he would be outmatched. Sacrificing herself, Talzin held off Sidious as Maul reluctantly escaped. Still, Maul was possibly one of the most refined martial artists of the Sith Order. Galen Marek, codenamed Starkiller, also known simply as the Apprentice, was a young human male born on Kashyyyk, 19 years before the Battle of Yavin. He would be born to 2 Jedi, Molly and Kinto Marek, who deserted the Council due to their relationship. Galen Marek's father was slayed by Darth Vader during the sacking of Kashyyyk. Sensing Galen's heightened Force abilities, Vader would take him under his wing as his secret apprentice. In the battles of Vader's Executor Star Destroyer, Galen would ruthlessly be trained as a Sith assassin. For years, he would do small jobs for Vader, an execution here and there. It would not be until 2 years before the Battle of Yavin when Vader would recognize him as his Sith apprentice, bestowing him with a mission to kill famed Jedi Ram Koda. Over the next few weeks and months, Starkiller would travel around the galaxy, assassinating several notable Jedi. In a few complicated twists of events, Galen would inadvertently help create the Rebel Alliance that would eventually overthrow the Empire. However, he died at the Alliance's expense, becoming a martyr to their cause. Still, Galen Marek's intense training would craft him into one of the most powerful practitioners of the Force in any age. As with all my videos, I will be comparing these two in their primes. For Darth Maul, this would be his time at the end of the Clone Wars as depicted in the Son of Dathomir comic book series. For Galen, this will be his time during the Force Unleashed novelization. As a side note for Galen, all his feats and achievements will be coming from the novelization, not the video game. Darth Maul stood over 2 meters tall with his cybernetic legs and was extremely resistant to pain. His Zabrak blood would afford him a high pain resistance, and his human half would afford him resiliency. Those 2 attributes, coupled with his grueling training under Darth Sidious, would groom him into a hardened beast. Initially, he would be trained by the droid TD-D9, which was programmed to brutally punish Maul after his failings. Eventually, when Maul turned 10 years old, Sidious would send him to the Orsis Academy, telling the instructors he wanted him trained as a bodyguard. This would give Maul impeccable training in regards to his martial arts skill, especially due to the fact that Sidious instructed him specifically not to use the Force during his time there. Darth Sidious would put Maul through more cruel training scenarios, including, but not limited to, dunking Maul in freezing water, tying Maul up by his ankles for hours on end, and battling scores of assassin droids alone. Eventually, Sidious would deem him worthy as a Sith Lord, but without much Sith training. Darth Maul was molded as a Sith assassin more than he was a Sith apprentice. Nevertheless, his training and biology afforded him ridiculous amounts of resiliency. He could withstand not only standard physical strikes, but he was also been noted to resist the effects of Force lightning, as evidenced by his fight with the Night Sister Miguela. Most of all, Maul was a master of the Teräs Käsi discipline, something he would learn from his time at the Orsis Academy when he was not allowed to use the Force. Practitioners of Teräs Käsi were adept at hand-to-hand combat, enabling astounding use of speed in their strikes. Not only were the users of this form formidable in their offense, but they were trained with defense in mind as well. Users would train to anticipate their strikes from their opponent, slipping and dodging. They were also trained to close their minds to Force sensitives, protecting themselves against mental attacks. Initially, the Teräs Käsi fighting style was developed for non-Force users to combat against Jedi and Sith alike. If Maul could master this fighting style and be a Force sensitive at the same time, it would enable him an astounding skill with it. During the Clone Wars, few could match Darth Maul's martial prowess, a product decades in the making through cruel training and punishment. At around 6 feet tall, Galen was a slender but athletic young man. Juno Eclipse, his pilot and later lover, would comment on his appearance, stating he was thin as a whip. Though Starkiller did not look like much, he still attained great levels of strength through the Force. In his fight with Shaak Ti, he took several skids from her lightsaber, though he was still able to fight her off. In his final fight with Darth Vader, he was able to contend with him too, despite the fact that hours earlier he suffered from a grave injury to his chest, and he had spent several minutes fighting Imperials to reach Vader. He also showcased great endurance in his fights, which makes sense as he was trained relentlessly by Vader through grueling sparring sessions. During his fight with Cassian Paratus, he would fight through 12 mannequins mimicking the style of the Jedi Council. Though the mannequins were fighting with a crude representation of each combatant's style, they still were many, and Galen was few. All that being said, Galen was able to fight through all 12 and eventually defeat Kasdan. This round is rather decisive. While they both had extremely tough training, Galen under the brooding Vader, and Maul under the unrelenting Sidious, Maul's natural ability would give him the edge. Galen's combat speed also left something to be desired, as he had trouble with Shaak Ti's quick slashes and stabs. As a comparison, Shaak Ti contended with and was defeated by General Grievous, who was always noted for his speed. By extension, Darth Maul was able to contend with and defeat Grievous. So Maul gets the edge in regards to speed. What's more, Maul gets the edge in his martial skill, as he was a master of Teräs Käsi. Galen may have been competent with hand-to-hand combat, but I doubt he could match a Teräs Käsi master. An example of Maul's martial skill would come with his fight with Pre Vizsla, a fight in which he never used any of his Force abilities. Where they are comparable is their endurance, as Galen would last against several enemies for several minutes, and Maul could keep up a duel for several minutes as well. Still, I would say it's rather concrete that Darth Maul gets the edge in terms of their physical abilities. As stated before, Darth Maul's greatest power did not come from his knowledge of the Force. He was much more inclined to punch or kick his opponent than Force push him. That being said, he does have some skill with telekinesis, specifically with Force push, grip, and choke, though he was never reliant on his abilities in this regard. His most notable use of the Force would possibly be his Force Wall, able to resist Force Lightning, though this could be more due to his physical resiliency and less on his Force Wall. Maul was able to retain his life through the dark side of the Force, even after being cut in half. His survival stemmed from his rage against Obi-Wan Kenobi, wanting to face him again to redeem his failure on Naboo. Yet, being able to survive mortal wounds does not a victor make. It wasn't the fact that he was able to survive his injuries, but that his pain threshold was so high. Thus, physical strikes or blowbacks from the Force would not do him in. Only a decapitation or a stab through the heart could take Maul down for the count. However, his standard Force abilities would seem to have been honed by the time of the Clone Wars. He would utilize a powerful Force push against Kenobi, as well as choking a Falleen without even looking at him. In desperation, he was even able to pull an entire shuttle down from a cliff. This is an astounding feat, yes, but I do not think it was in the realm of Darth Maul's usual Force abilities. Instead, it was his heightened state of mind through desperation which afforded him this power. Even so, Maul was very particular about his use of the Force, often using it as an afterthought rather than his go-to. Instead, he willed himself over his opponents through focused martial arts skill over his mystical skill. Galen Marek may not have the highest midichlorian count ever, but he did hold an extreme amount of raw power with the Force. His use of the Force was so respected, even Darth Sidious admitted that one day he could be his equal. Offensively, Starkiller was a well-sharpened tool. His use of mind tricks were impeccable, his use of Force lightning was proficient, and he would even later be able to call on the future at will. Not only did he have a raw ability with the Force, but he also displayed great variety and skill with it. In standard combat, he used it effortlessly with blaster-wielding foes, making great use of the Force repulse technique when he was cornered. In his fight against Drexel and the other raiders of Roxas Prime, he was able to repulse them all before any of them could get a shot off. Galen was not just crafty in his use of the Force, he was also extremely powerful. On Roxas Prime, he was able to redirect a crashing Star Destroyer with only his telekinetic grip, though of course, he did this with great strain. Defensively, Marek left a bit to be desired, as did most offensive Force users did. Against Masters of the Force, he constantly had his Force wall broken. However, he was not completely useless with his defensive abilities. As per usual, Darth Vader would employ telekinetic throws against Galen with objects, much like Vader would do against Luke. Unlike Luke, however, Galen was able to deflect them away, even though they were flying as fast as missiles. Not to mention, Galen also fought through his master's Force chokes. All in all, Galen Marek coupled his raw skill with great application, making him one of the most well-rounded Force users of all time. Again, this round is rather decisive. After all, the source for all of Galen's achievements is called the Force Unleashed. Yes, Maul was competent with his use of the Force, even applying it within his lightsaber sequences, but his raw power was outmatched by Galen. Galen's bread and butter was his use of the Force, and he matched his application with devastating power. Therefore, it would only be right to give the edge to Galen Marek as a Force user. Darth Maul has carried both a double-bladed and single-bladed lightsaber with red synthesized crystal. In regards to this specific matchup, I'll be observing him with the ancient Darksaber, which he took from Pre Vizsla. Darth Sidious would train Maul as a Juyo specialist. Juyo, which was the 7th and final form of lightsaber combat, was a style that drew directly from the dark side and the practitioner's inner emotions. Though many Juyo users like Darth Vader or Ram Koda used Dun Mach in conjunction with the form, Maul only took from Juyo's physical aspects. During the Clone Wars, however, Maul would become a bit more refined, employing Dun Mach against Obi-Wan Kenobi. Darth Maul would also become proficient in his use of Niman. Again, unlike most users of Niman who trained to use it in conjunction with Force abilities, Maul practiced it to further his training with dual blade fencing, employing the Jar-Kai variant of Niman. And Maul probably had some knowledge of Ataru, as he often incorporated acrobatics within his fighting style. Not to mention, Maul had an astounding ability with Teräs Käsi, the hand-to-hand style designed for non-Force users, as previously discussed in Round 1 for physical abilities. His mastery of all these forms would enable him deadly speed, a speed complemented by even Darth Plagueis the Wise. Don't get me wrong though, Maul was not combat-centric in the way he fought. He also had some tactical ingenuity. When he could not outright beat someone through initial combat, his endurance enabled him to figure out another way to defeat them. In the Phantom Menace novelization, Qui-Gon would comment on Maul's skill and confidence. It was the Sith that was controlling the struggle, wheeling and spinning, leaping and somersaulting with astonishing ease. Their enemy was taking them with him, drawing them to a place of his own choosing. Still, in terms of his outright combat, he was a fantastic duelist, matching even Darth Sidious blow for blow, even at least for a few moments. Galen Marek carried a tattered lightsaber hilt with exposed crystal encasing at its center. He would change his lightsaber color frequently throughout his conquest, starting with a red crystal, then to a green crystal, and finally settling on his father's old blue crystal, which he described as having a lighter fit in his hand. Though Darth Vader was a Form 5 specialist, he did not teach Galen in this form, instead wanting him to mold his own style. Starkiller would go on to do just that, adopting qualities from many lightsaber forms including Surisu and Juyo, with a base in Xi'an. However, he had familiarity with all the lightsaber forms, able to decipher them in his opponent's movesets. He was able to do this because he grew up with a lightsaber combat droid named Proxy, who cataloged all the styles of previous lightsaber users. Therefore, Galen became proficient with Surisu, the all-defensive form, through his training with Obi-Wan Kenobi's avatar. Juyo, which was an all-offensive form, he taught himself, but he used to great effect against Ram Koda and Maris Brood. More often than not, he utilized the inverted variant of the Xi'an form. He would employ this against most of his blaster-wielding foes, but the style would also trickle over into his lightsaber combat as well. All things considered, Galen was a fantastic duelist. He understood the intricacies of the other forms enough to defend against them, and he employed his own with great effectiveness. This round comes much closer than the previous two. In lightsaber to lightsaber combat, both combatants utilized Juyo for their offense, though I would say Maul was more successful in its use, contending with Sidious, overwhelming Obi-Wan Kenobi and Qui-Gon Jinn, and outclassing Anun Bandara. In their defense, I would say Galen was more proficient, as he studied Surisu through Obi-Wan Kenobi's proxy avatar. However, Galen's defense did have limits, as showcased with his fights against Kazdan Paratus and Shaak Ti. Comparatively, Maul does not have an extensive defense either, preferring his offense. However, Maul was able to defend and counter an assault from Aayla Secura and Mace Windu, even for a short while. The major difference between the two fighters would be Galen's use of Xi'an and Maul's use of Niman. Though Xi'an was adept at counterattacks, it was designed for blaster deflection and was weak against single opponents, as noted by the Jedi Path, so Xi'an would not be much use against someone like Maul. By contrast, Niman was all-encompassing. It gave its user the ability to adapt to most situations of combat. While most Niman users use the Force in conjunction with their lightsaber movesets, Maul complemented the form with Teräs Käsi. It would be this attribute that I believe would give the edge to Darth Maul. Yes, Galen contended with Darth Vader, but that was largely due to his familiarity with his form. Galen was even able to defeat Darth Maul as a proxy avatar. However, he was not fighting the real Maul, who would have Force perception instead of a CPU, as depicted in the novelization of The Force Unleashed. Knowledge was not the same thing as experience, just as clever technology wasn't the same as the Force. He was confident he could defeat the core in Proxy's body at a fair fight. Proxy was nowhere near as flexible as him, and he had none of the Force-enhanced reflexes he possessed. But Galen would be fighting the real Darth Maul, who would have Force-enhanced reflexes, Darth Maul, who would have Force perception, and Darth Maul, who would ultimately get the edge as a lightsaber duelist. A fight between these two would be very interesting. Galen was the apprentice of Darth Vader, and Maul was the apprentice of Darth Sidious. They were both trained from infancy, broken down, and rebuilt stronger than before. While Marek had immense endurance and was rather resilient, Maul matched his attributes and surpassed him due to his natural biology. Though Maul was competent in the Force, Galen was a prodigy, employing raw power with refined skill. And they were both trained to be deadly assassins and efficient killers, but Darth Maul's skill set would give him the ultimate edge. Let's set up this fight. Let's say it takes place in the Emperor's throne room. Each fighter would stand the same distance Luke and Vader stood from each other in their fight. They would both draw their blades at the same time, clashing Darksaber and Bluesaber before the Emperor. They trade off blows, Galen defending with Sarisu, Maul attacking with Juyo. Galen is taken aback by Maul's strength and speed. Eventually, Maul lands a kick, sending Galen toppling over, head over heel. But Maul is not letting up. Before Galen can gather himself, Maul is jumping towards him with his Darksaber. Galen now stretches his hand instinctively, throwing out a blast of Force lightning. It catches Maul full on, throwing him back. Galen regains his composure as Maul kicks himself back up, unfazed by the lightning shock, but his cybernetic legs begin to twitch. As we have seen before, Galen would analyze Maul's fighting style at this point. He would understand that he was a master of Juyo. He would also know that his best bet would be to keep distance between himself and the Dathomirian. Maul attacks again with a running stride. Galen throws a series of force pushes and bolts of lightning at Maul, but the Zabrak, utilizing Teräs Käsi, anticipates his attacks. With a somersault to the left, Maul evades Galen's force lightning. With a cartwheel to the right, Maul dodges Galen's force push. When Maul is inches away from Galen, Starkiller throws the force from himself in a repulse. Maul's cybernetic legs, still recovering from the lightning shock, just aren't fast enough, and the Zabrak is thrown back bodily again, hitting the ground hard. He is still unfazed, but he becomes frustrated with his inability to get close to Galen. In a concentrated rage, Maul takes his Darksaber in his hand like a spear, hurling it towards Marek's chest. The apprentice leaps over the blade just in time, though it grazes his thigh. When he lands, Maul is all over him. At first, Galen doesn't understand the pain ringing in his ear, the ache in his ribs, and the discomfort in his thigh. He realizes soon after that Maul landed a deft kick to his ear, an elbow to his ribs, and a left hook to his thigh, all in the blink of an eye. Then, suddenly, he could feel Maul's grip around his wrist, turning it over. Out of simple human reaction, Galen's grip releases his lightsaber hilt and it falls to the ground. With an open palm, Maul drives Galen away with a swift shove. With his free hand, the Zabrak calls his Darksaber to his hand, unleashing another assault against Galen. His first strike swipes Galen across his healthy thigh. The next strike swipes across his shoulder blade. The third would have been a decapitation if Galen had not ducked under. With a quick move of his own, Galen calls his saber to his hand, letting himself fall into the defensive nature of Surisu. But Maul is bloodlusted, unrelenting. He batters at Galen's weak defense. The Zabrak continues to utilize Juyo, but integrates Terra's Kasi strikes as well. After a cleave of his blade, he follows it with a punch. After a strike with his saber, he proceeds with an uppercut. Eventually, it becomes too much for Galen, who can find no strength and no counteroffensive with the Force. All his abilities were being diverted to his Force augmentation, maintaining the fight. And then, with one powerful overhead strike, Maul finally breaks Galen's defenses. With a quick crosscut of his Darksaber, he cuts through Galen's midsection, and the young apprentice falls to his side in two halves. And thus, I declare Darth Maul, the Sith assassin, the victor. Of course, this is just all my opinion. I would love to see you guys' thoughts and comments. Discussing different scenarios is always my favorite part, and believe me, I do not mind if you have a differing opinion to mine. Do you think Galen Marek could have gotten the better of the Dathomirian? Or do you agree that the ultimate victory lies with Darth Maul? As always, peace, love, and may the Force be with you. Always. Vader can match the speeds of a faster duelist, and Vapad's use can only be used effectively in short bursts. Therefore, I do not think Windu's use of Form 7 would trump Darth Vader alone. In this special video, my first geek rant, as I'll call it, I'll be discussing the dark side versus the light side.
Alright, cool. So you're Hagrid, I am the boy who lived. So I cheated a little bit. I played last night just to see how to play.